and I met at a pivotal moment in our lives. Both of our parents had gotten divorced, and it had been maybe at most a year, so we were still kind of reeling from that and adjusting to that. Parents had started dating and introduced us to each other, and it was in a parking lot of the skate place. And I remember one of the first things he said to me was, "Oh, you like Europe too?" And he wasn't talking about the country Europe, he was talking about the big hair band Europe that I had just bought their new cassette tape. And you might know them, The Final Countdown. Do-do-do-do. Anyway, instant friendship was born, of course, once he said that. And then he just cemented the deal later on when he showed me how he was able to skate backwards. I thought that was really cool. I couldn't do that myself. He, at that point in his life, not only was he having some problems with just having divorced parents, but he was getting picked on at school and had a whole sequence of nicknames that he hated, but I'll go ahead and tell you because we laughed at it many times. Later on, it was funny. At the time, it wasn't funny to him. His first nickname that he had was Light 'em Up Langley. If you're familiar with that, he got this nickname because he was on a class field trip. I think it was a class field trip. I wasn't there, but I can see the whole thing in my head because I know Kris. And they must have had these novelty matches in the gift shop. He picked up the matches and I guess wanted to check to make sure that they work. So he lit one, and then I guess it surprised him that the matches lit when you flicked them, and then he dropped the match into the bowl with all of the other novelty matches, which also ignited. And then it stuck him with, in elementary school, it stuck him with the name Light 'em Up Langley. Later on, that was expanded to Light 'em Up Laxative Langley, which is not nearly as amusing a story, but it involved laxative and cafeteria food. And then later on after that, his nickname was expanded to Light 'em Up Laxative Lumpy Head Langley, which I think I was the only one who used that. It was kind of too long to be a nickname. But to really understand Kris, you have to realize he had a series of very serious head injuries in his life. The first of which was in high school and involved him being on the hood of a car and the car accelerating and eventually Kris not being able to remain on the hood of that car. I think the technical term for it was a cracked cranium, but he spent some hospital time with that. Later on, he suffered his second head injury when he was in the Spirit of Atlanta, or Spirit, I don't remember which one it's called, but it's a drum corps in Atlanta. It's like a professional marching band. And he played the biggest instrument, the big tuba. And they do, in DCI, they do these serious horn pops, where you go from the horn being down to the horn being up really fast. And it's like a big instrument, this big. Well, the guy next to him hit him in the head with that big tuba, knocked him unconscious, and sent him to the hospital. Kris, very admirable, spent his time in the hospital once again, and then went back to Spirit of Atlanta, where they were still, practicing during the summer, and stood next to that same guy, and the same guy did another horn pop, hit him in the head a second time, which would make the third serious head injury. He once again went into the hospital, and he didn't go back to the DCI again after that. Let's see here. Well, when the bond that I developed with Kris right off the bat really had to do with music. We were discovering music together, books, and Nintendo. Those three things can pretty much summarize our middle school relationship with each other. We listened to and discovered stuff for the first time. Van Halen, Shostakovich, the Beatles, various headbangers, ball bands. We liked a lot of the same books, particularly Stephen King and D.N.R. Kuntz back then. I remember we had a family vacation one year where we were packing for the vacation. And we put at least 20 King and Kuntz books in our suitcase, and we're not talking about little picture books. We're talking about like 800-page thick books. It was quite ambitious of us to think we could read, I guess, 10,000 pages in a single week while we were on vacation. But in our defense, I think we did that just in case we didn't read one book, but we had a backup plan, another backup plan, another backup plan. But remember, after we had packed our suitcase, his mom asked us, are you going to take any clothes on the trip? So we had to take some of the books out and then add some clothes and, I guess, toiletries also to the suitcases. With Nintendo, we spent a lot of time playing Nintendo. And we had a lot of arguments over the Nintendo. If you've ever played, I'm sure you realize it can get very intense when you're playing a game and it's a two-player game and the other person goes too far to the right on the screen and it kills the person on the left side of the screen. Eventually, part of the TV got damaged from a swift kick to it in one of those moments of passion. Those of you who have had divorced parents and gone through that, you might sympathize with some of the early sleeping arrangements that Kris and I went through. In the beginning, when Denise and I, my sister, when we would visit, there weren't beds enough for everybody. So Kris and I slept on air mattresses, which was just the fancy name for inflatable pool devices, and we'd sleep on the floor. Later on, we ended up sharing a bed, and I remember one night, in the middle of the night, I woke up one time in extreme pain, and for about 2 minutes, just my whole body was hurting. I couldn't figure out what is going on. I thought I was dying. And then I realized that Kris had kneed me in the groin in my sleep. So I pushed him off the bed. Like, what? His voice hadn't changed yet. Then later on, we got to sleep in separate beds eventually by the time we were in high school. And once we were in high school, Kris had found a niche for himself, and he had lost the laxative Langley, light 'em up Langley nicknames and moved on to better nicknames like Spit. He'd found a niche for himself in band and with his music and just being comfortable with who he was. And with his music, he had something that to me is a superpower. He had what's called perfect pitch. Perfect pitch is where you can just hear a note and he'd say, that's a C. Or you could say, Kris, sing F sharp. And he would go, and it would be right. It was really neat. And it's just an amazing ability. And everything that he did music-wise was amazing. He could just listen to something and pick it up immediately, be able to play it, be able to identify it. And he could pick up I was always jealous of how he could I'd be like, when did you start playing trumpet? When did you get, when did this happen? He was like, a week ago. And I was like, okay, he could just pick up anything. When I was in high school, I had my own band. I didn't have him in it, but we needed a guest vocalist once. Our regular vocalist was out of town, so I asked Kris if he would sing for us. And we were playing a dive called the Rec Room in Atlanta. And he practiced with us like once, and then we went and did the show. And there was a point during the show where Kris went to the edge of the stage and got down on his knees, and I looked at the other guitarist, and like for a few seconds we're like, wow, this is awesome, he's really getting into the music. Then we looked again and realized he'd put the lyric sheet down on the floor in the front. The lights were kind of dim, so he'd kneeled down closer and closer, and then he just gave up. He did the rest of the concert with the lyrics in his hand. We weren't as impressed with him anymore. But it's a lot. It was like 8 songs to memorize in a night's time, so he did a good job with it.